Good morning. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm Malcolm Bales. I'm the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas. We're going to have a press announcement. You have a press packet in front of you. If you have any questions, my Public Information Officer, Davlin Walston, is in the back of the room. Of course, as I've already announced, following my formal remarks, we will be here to answer some questions. The indictment is in front of you, and the rules, as usual, that we can answer questions about things that are in the four corners in the indictment. Can't talk a whole lot about what the evidence is in this particular case. I want to introduce to you our partners in this case. Like most of the cases we do, we can't do them without a task force of officers and policemen. And in this regard, my friend Rob Elder, Assistant Special Agent in Charge from the ATF in Houston, is here. I also have Mike Little, the Liberty County District Attorney. They were essential in the early part of this investigation and are a valued partner. From the Cleveland Police Department, they did a lot of the initial work and are trustworthy folks who work with us on many occasions. Scott Feltz, who is the detective captain, is here. And then from the Texas Rangers, they have been hand in hand with us, arm in arm, almost from the beginning. In fact, we were the last ones to the party, I think. But, the local ranger, Ken Parks, is here, and Lieutenant David Rainwater from the Texas Rangers is also here as well. Earlier this year, I stood in the Nacogdoches City Hall and announced on February the 1st what I promised would be a series, the first of a series of prosecutions targeting an organized criminal gang known as the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. And during my remarks, I will also refer to this gang as the ABT, which is their more common nickname. That first indictment charged an ABT general named Carl Carver, along with other ABT members, with conspiracy as well as the murder of two individuals in Nacogdoches County. Their names are David Mitchemore and Christy Brown. And the evidence in that case, which will be tried next year, will show that Mitchemore was murdered on the direct order of the ABT general, Carl Carver, and that Christy Brown was shotgunned to death because she was a witness in the wrong place at the wrong time. Today I'm announcing the next figurative shoe to drop in that investigation. 2 days ago, we unsealed an indictment charging yet another ABT general named Steven Cooke, who is referred to by a number of aliases but is most commonly known as Stainless, and another ABT soldier named David Michels, with conspiracy and the murder of a rival gang member named Scott Freeman. Freeman's body was discovered on October the 12th, 2008 in Liberty County. He had been shot to death at close range with 6 rounds from a .45 caliber pistol. Since that grisly discovery, local police officers, the Texas Rangers, and ATF agents have worked very closely with prosecutors in our Lufkin office, who also have responsibility for the first murder, to solve the murder and bring the individuals responsible to justice. The evidence was presented to a federal grand jury meeting here in Beaumont, Texas, and they have reviewed that collective evidence and returned the 3-count indictment that you have in front of you today. I'm very conscious of the fact that the defendants that are charged in this case, as well as every defendant in every federal case, are presumed innocent. We haven't proven anything yet, but on the right occasion, and I think this is the right occasion, it is appropriate to share in a more detailed fashion news concerning what the agents, the officers, and prosecutors are doing to make our hometowns safer. And that's what I'm doing today, because while we indict lots of people, it's a rare day indeed when a prosecutor can stand in front of you and announce such a significant blow in the battle to curtail, and yes, our intention is to destroy the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. The ABT is a vicious prison gang, has an increasing presence in the free world here in the Golden Triangle and all over East Texas. They claim and promote whites as a superior race and do a number of organized criminal activities. Now, from a strict law enforcement perspective, we think ABT members are fair game, not because of their obnoxious racial views, but because they make up an organized criminal enterprise which is becoming more troublesome every day. More specifically, ABT gang members enforce a code of discipline that often results in either savage beatings or, as on this occasion, the murder of any ABT member or ABT rival who runs afoul of the ABT or its leadership. These practices are precisely what this indictment addresses. And as I've already noted, this all began when officers discovered Scott Freeman's lifeless body on a farm to market road in Liberty County on October 12th. Now, our state and local partners that I have behind me, the folks in Liberty County conducted the initial investigation. They've done a great job. But we have been looking at the ABT for a while, and after consulting with those partners, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ATF, and the Texas Rangers have assumed control of the Freeman case, along with several other cases that have suspected ABT involvement. As you can see from this indictment, we've chosen to prosecute the case by alleging a violation of the VICAR statute. That's V-I-C-A-R. VICAR stands for Violent Crime in Aid of Racketeering. The VICAR statute was enacted by Congress in 1984, and it was designed to give prosecutors a powerful weapon to combat gangs and other organized crime violence. For example, it's a violation of the VICAR statute to commit violence to maintain or gain status in what the law describes as a racketeering enterprise. Enforcing a code of conduct through violence would be another example. We allege that the ABT is a criminal enterprise, an organization, in fact, that affects interstate commerce and does commit acts of violence. Now, the Bible tells us that there's nothing new under the sun, and that's certainly true concerning most criminal behavior. Organized crime has been around for a long time, and of course, ABT members are just the latest version of those type of gangsters. They have bizarre tattoos and a despicable racial agenda. Prison gangs such as the ABT are racketeering enterprises. They commit crimes such as drug distribution, extortion, robbery, counterfeiting, and of course, violent crimes like murder. And in so doing, they do affect interstate commerce, so they're prime targets for the federal prosecutors in this office and in the other offices in the Eastern District. Now, you'll find as you read the indictment that the ABT relishes its violent heritage. They have to blood in. Members have to blood in, which is to say they must commit an act of violence in service to the ABT in order to become a member. And once in the gang, members are expected to unconditionally obey their supervising officers in the gang infrastructure. The indictment contains 2 counts that relate to the conspiracy to murder and the actual murder of Scott Freeman. And the 3rd count is one charging the defendants with using a firearm to commit that VICAR murder. All of the charged crimes carry potential statutory punishment of death or life imprisonment. And as you may know, and if you don't know, let me tell you, only the Attorney General of the United States can authorize a prosecution that could result in the death penalty. And that authorization has not happened in this case. So as it stands now, the maximum punishment is life imprisonment. As I've already emphasized, nothing has been proven yet, but we're very much looking forward to prosecuting the case, presenting the evidence to a jury in a court of law. Both men were in court on Wednesday before a magistrate here in Beaumont, where they received statutory warnings, and they're getting counsel, and a number of other pretrial matters are being taken care of. Let me say this. Besides this case, our ABT task force will continue to pursue all the evidence of any racketeering acts committed by the ABT in this district, the Eastern District, and elsewhere. One of the happy things that's happened in this case is we've also had a lot of help from our friends in the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. For example, the gang unit in our criminal division in Washington has charged yet another heinous ABT murder that took place in Atascosa County, which is a county near San Antonio. And we're very excited and delighted about that prospect as they are rounding up people in that regard. But I want to promise the people of East Texas and the rest of the state as well that we will not rest until we've brought to justice every criminal segment of the ABT and have shattered the ABT as we know it today. Now, I'll be glad to entertain some questions with the ground rules that we've announced, and I believe the officers and agents behind me may be able to answer your question, but if not, they may also defer to me. If you have any questions about what I've said or the indictment, I'll be happy to entertain them now.
When do you expect the next stage in this court appearances to happen?
I was not here this week when the initial appearance was. They did not have lawyers, and so I don't think they've been arraigned. Is that Robert, my supervising attorney? Do you know whether or not they were actually arraigned?
The lawyers have been selected, but they've not been arraigned.
Okay. The arraignment is the next formal part of the prosecution. You can go on PACER, or perhaps Ms. Walston can get you that date. They'll be asked to enter a plea of not guilty at that time, and a trial date will almost assuredly be set at that point with orders about when we need to make discovery, things like that. The investigation is still ongoing, though. We're going to keep working, obviously getting ready for trial, but there are other things that we are pursuing in the course of this investigation as well. Yes, ma'am.
If you can go ahead and just emphasize again how the ABT is still very active, and how dangerous it is for the citizens of Texas.
Yeah, the ABT, and we give you a little brief overview of the history of the ABT. They really are modeled on the Aryan Brotherhood, which was it is a notorious prison gang coming out of the California State Prison. The ABT started some time ago as modeled after the ABT in the Texas State Prison. Unfortunately, they've not only are all over the Texas prison system, but they're also in the federal system as well. We have ABT members in the Beaumont complex, for example. What we've noticed most recently in the last 5 years or so is that some of these folks are now getting out of prison. They're on parole, but as you can see from the indictment, we allege that ABT members are members for life. And so while they are quite organized in prison, they become less so outside of prison, and things happen. But the infrastructure is quite strong in the free world, as they call it, and when ABT members do not comply, or as noticed in the indictment, there's another rival faction of ABT, as a matter of fact, tremendous violence takes place, including murders. We've prosecuted 2 separate murders where the overarching motive is alleged to be an ABT member who ran afoul of the rules, or a rival member, in this case, was recruiting in an area that was considered to be this ABT faction's area. So they prey on each other a lot, but they're drug users, drug dealers. They do counterfeit, they extort. They are traditional organized crime gangsters. Maybe a lot more tattoos than what you might be used to seeing, but they're a serious problem.
What kind of numbers are you talking as far as membership and type?
I'm not an expert about that. In fact, that's one of the processes that we're involved in the investigation. It's a secret organization. The TDCJ does a great job of trying to identify gang members, and when they're identified as an ABT member, they automatically are subject to further scrutiny, segregated housing, for example. So one of the things, the phenomena that we've noticed lately is that ABT members who are really quite proud of their membership, and you can tell from certain patches, is what they call their tattoos, that they earn, are actually not doing that now, or they do disguised tattoos because they don't want to be subject to the additional procedures that are TDC. So I don't know if there's an active number. ATF and the Rangers are really kind of the experts in this regard. Rob, do you know if we have a number?
It's certainly in the thousands. I wouldn't have an exact number.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge deal. They are the preeminent white gang in the state prison system, and unfortunately they're spreading to the federal system as well. Yes, ma'am.
If you can reiterate why each arrest is so significant and important to y'all.
Well, we've been working very hard to, when you attack a structure like this, it's not that much different from a drug organization or any kind of organized criminal activity. You really want to strike at the head, we believe. And there have been prosecutions of ABT members for being felons in possession. We do those type of cases all the time. If we catch them in other federal crimes like drug dealing, you may recall there was an indictment here that we announced, which was a massive drug investigation that actually started with information about ABT members getting methamphetamine from Houston, Texas. So we do that, but in this case, if you understand the ABT structure, no murder like this is carried out without the direct orders of the wheel, the so-called wheel, which are the 5 generals in Texas. And so we are taking advantage of their violent tendencies to strike at the wheel. 2 of the 5 generals are now under federal indictment for murder. And so that's why we think this is especially important to announce to folks that we're making great success in our struggle against the ABT.
That quote that you quoted, thousands, members in the thousands, are you talking the state prison system or the federal?
It's primarily a state prison gang, but a lot of these guys get out, and for example, they are fascinated with weapons as a federal crime, and so you're seeing a lot of state prisoners being incarcerated for the federal crime of possessing a weapon when they're being convicted convicted of a felony. So they are not in the same fashion of strength as they are in the state system. And like I would say, TDC knows about these guys, and they're taking strong steps to try to destabilize the prison structure of the gang as well. And I commend them for that. They've been very, very helpful in our investigation. I think if anybody knows the most about the ABT, it's probably TDCJ. Wouldn't you agree, Rangers? Yeah.
Do your efforts extend to the Aryan Circle and some of the other ones, or is it just mainly the ABT?
This particular focus is on the ABT. I'm aware of the Aryan Circle. I know of Aryan Circle prosecutions in the Western District of Texas, for example, but for whatever reason, and part of it is there's so many TDC facilities in our district, so these guys parole out, but they are in every region. One of the things you'll notice in the indictment is that they have cultivated their territories based on TDC regions. And so there's 5 generals because there's 5 TDCJ regions that the TDC is organized in that fashion as far as their management of the prison system. And the ABT has adopted that geographical division as the division of how they organize their own gangs. So this is, as I mentioned, we have a gang unit from D.C. helping us. There are active cases in the Western District of Texas, the Southern District of Texas, and I'm aware that the Northern District has started something as well. So Aryan Circle, I don't know a lot about them. We've been on the ABT. I was just telling you.
Okay. Mr. Bales, tell me a little bit about how what the case was, how it originally started.
For my office, the Eastern District of Texas, this all began in 2007. There were 2 people who had been shotgunned to death in a rural part of Nacogdoches County. David Mitchemore and his girlfriend, Christy Brown, were found having been shot at close range. Very quickly, it became obvious to local law enforcement, and we became involved because of the nature of the ABT, that this was an ABT hit. And so we've investigated the ABT since then. In the process, what we've found is that the ABT is a very integrated criminal organized gang that has a very military-style hierarchy, and that things don't happen like the murder in Nacogdoches without direct supervision or the direct order, in this case, from a senior member called a general in the ABT. And so that general, Carl Carver, was charged with the conspiracy and murder of those 2 individuals this January, and then we began understanding that perhaps murder on October of 2008 also seemed to be ABT related. And so we pursued that particular case, and the investigation has led us to present information to the grand jury, which returned an indictment against another ABT general named Steven Cooke.
Tell me a little bit about the case in Cleveland.
Well, the case, of course, is outlined in the indictment, but the evidence will show that the victim in that case, Scott Freeman, was a member of a rival faction of the ABT. If you know much about the ABT, they actually have had a split in their organization. Depending on the part of the state that you're in, one faction has more control than the other as far as the supervision of its own gang members or numbers of gang members. In this case, Freeman, we believe, was recruiting for his faction and had run afoul of the ABT faction in which one of the defendants in this case was a general. And so on that particular day, we think the evidence will show that Steven Cooke, that general, also known as Stainless, along with a functionary, a guy named David Michels, lured Freeman to that area and shot him to death and left his body on the side of the road.
How was he found? How did they find him?
It actually was not an area of heavy traffic. Most of Liberty County is quite rural, as you know. But there were people driving to work or just in the area who saw something that looked suspicious to them. Freeman's body had been drugged behind his pickup, but there was something that struck one of the witnesses' eye. They investigated, and within a short period of time after Freeman had actually been murdered, police were responding to the scene.
Okay. Now, what both these are in custody right now, but they have been in custody also.
Yes, both defendants are actually serving federal sentences. Both men were earlier in other cases convicted of being felons in possession of firearms. That's a federal crime with a punishment of up to 10 years in prison. Mr. Cooke, I believe, received 8 years, sentence of 8 years from the Southern District of Texas. Mr. Michels received a sentence of about, I think, slightly over 3 years. He was prosecuted in this district, the Eastern District. So both men were already in federal prison for other crimes when we brought them out to face prosecution on these charges.
So what happens from here now?
Well, they're presumed innocent, and they will receive due process within the federal courts here in Beaumont. They've had their initial appearance. They've been appointed counsel. They'll have an arraignment sometime probably in the next week or so. A trial date will be set, and we will go to trial on the charges unless they try to work something out with the government.
Well, it's a life-death situation. How does it determine the death penalty or life?
There's a protocol that is part of the law, actually, of the federal death penalty statute, that only the Attorney General of the United States can make such a decision. All death penalty eligible cases are required to go to him. It's a quite complicated process, as you can imagine, with many people weighing in on the decision because it's so significant. And eventually, Attorney General Holder will make a decision whether we will be directed to seek the death penalty or not. If it is a death penalty case, of course, it becomes much more complicated because of the severity of the penalty.